You're just increasing your risk overall and operational risk by not consolidating. If you're making centralized decisions, as the leadership, you can have greater confidence in the decision because you can spend more time on the decision and you're going to make a full effort into moving that. The coherence of a consistent plan will cover over the suboptimal nature of 10 or 15% of the situation.
And you're not repeating those decisions. You're not repeating over and over again. Is this cloud? Is this on-premise? This is the decision. And you're building up a new tooling set. You're building up the new mental model of how this should work.
So today, we've been having some conversations with various people, and it kind of triggered this topic of, how do you balance standardization versus granting autonomy in the technology ecosystem, right?
There's no right answer. It's depending on the org. It's a tough one.
So we're going to talk through some of the kind of make the case for both sides, and obviously, being extreme one way or the other is usually a bad idea in general. But we'll talk through it and see where we get. Because actually, this will be fun because we didn't pre-work out each other's positions on this, so it could be a little spicy. So it should be fun.
It could surprise you.
So start at the top, right? Obviously we can get into details, but as a technology leader, how do you balance? You're a CTO, you've run big app shops. How do you balance giving your teams the right to choose their own destiny versus standardization and consistency?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one to answer because there's a lot of context that matters around the technologies that you're using. Yeah, large enterprise. There's a lot to consider in that, meaning the tooling, the IAC formats. It's what are you deploying to? Lambdas, containers. What skills do you have? I don't think there's any easy answer there. There's a lot of factors that you have to put into consideration when you start to think about standardizing or not. There's what skills do we have? Are we hiring? Are we ramping up? Are we in a crunch time? Are we in wartime to push towards just getting stuff done at all costs? I mean, going full bore on a new feature is not the right time to just start to open up the door for full freedom. It's just keep going with what you got, make it work, get it done, and then we can come back later. So there's a lot of considerations that I would think about, and kind of rewinding back in time to when I was looking to explore more freedom on app teams, and it was the right time because we were getting into a new cloud environment. We were starting a migration to AWS. It seemed like it was a good time to start opening the door to more tools, and there was resistance to that. Natural resistance because you have a historical context of these are the tools that we use. This is what's approved. This is what we do, and why it was mandated that you use MongoDB for anything that was a NoSQL approach. But then, there was no rationale for it. We're not going to go there. but I remember those conversations because it was just, this is what you use. This is what you have to use because that's what's approved. But there's no rationale why, right? And so, when you're looking to explore, you have to see what pushback are you going to get on going too far outside of the comfort zone, because when you deploy a new language, if it's new in the environment, it's completely new everywhere else, and there's no support for it. There's no support for potentially code scanning of that language. There's shared utilities that you might have already built in a language that you're not going to have to rebuild from scratch on your own. So there's just a lot of considerations to make when you're looking at that, and I think we can start to give into that. There's a point that you have to start thinking of, what is that case for full freedom in this environment, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, the way I like to frame things in the most extreme way possible, right? It's essentially like a political debate between a central planning, Soviet style central planning, and a kind of decentralized libertarian state, right? It's those which is better, and the reality is they both have pros and cons, and they have different value in different circumstances, right? Not that I'm a fan of central planning in general. I generally come to most situations with the opinion that you should decentralize decision making as much as is possible, right? That is a kind of a philosophical, personal bias that I bring to almost every situation. This is one of those where I'm a hypocrite because I lend a little bit more towards central planning from a technology standpoint. But to your point, let's make the steel man for why you would do full freedom. Why you would say to a team, go nuts, use whatever you want. Right. And I think there are some benefits. It's not just chaos, right? Like you do get, engineers like shiny things, at least a lot of, there's two categories of engineer. Many of them like shiny things. Many of them like what they're comfortable with and they don't like to go outside the box. Generally the people that are better like the shiny things. And so like we say that calling it shiny things is a little derogatory, but actually that is a positive trait in certain contexts because it drives you, that interest that you get excited about drives you to go learn more, right?
And improve your shop. You just get better.
Yeah, exactly.
You see what are we missing?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a momentum and an energy that can come from that, right? Like the team itself will get excited about doing another CRUD app because they get to write it in new tech. And so it's interesting to them. And so there's an intellectual stimulation that maybe that work wouldn't have had on its own. So there's benefits there. There's also, it helps prevent stagnation, right? Because if you've got something locked and, we saw this for 15 years, right? Java or .NET, like that was it. Like in the enterprises, that was it. Those were the only choices. And you were one of those things. And that decision got revisited every 20 years. Right. And so that caused a lot of stagnation in those organizations technically, right? Because they weren't introducing new things.
You've got the existing code base. You've got the existing patterns. You're not introducing anything new to improve your system. It's just, this is the way we do it. We're going to do it in Java. We're going to use very object-oriented programming, and that's it. This is the way you do it. Just go make another one.
There is some benefit there, right? Like you do get the benefit of that kind of, you're dynamic, right? It's like, it's like in a lot of ways, it's the difference between a startup and the enterprise, right? Like you're dynamic, you can pivot, you can change new things. It's not too scary to try something new. You can try it for a little bit, decide. You can also do the tool of best fit, right? Like, in a lot of situations, they're like, well, we're a PHP shop or we're a Ruby shop or we're a Java shop, whatever it is, JavaScript shop. And that's great, but there's going to be situations where those aren't the right tools, right? But if you've got that, this way you can use the most optimized tool.
You know what you're getting in those cases, though. It's easier to plan. There's nothing new, no risks to it. You know exactly what you're going to get. That makes planning easy, makes it consistency. I need a Java API. You know what that timeline is going to be. It's easy to deliver the timelines because we've done it 20 times or more. There's no guesswork. It just is. This is what it is.
Yeah, but my point being that let's use JavaScript as an example. If you're primarily a JavaScript shop, but now you're going to do a bunch of ETL work, but you're a JavaScript shop, so you do the ETL work, right? Like we don't know anybody that does in JavaScript. We've never done that before ourselves. And it's just, you could do it, but it's hard.
It's not the right tool. It's just going to be, you can do it, right? You can do it. It's technically possible. Is it the right tool? Well, no, not technically, but it's possible to complete. It might take a little longer. You might have more defects or bugs because their memory usage is weird. You might have to make some trade-offs in how you're orchestrating it, but you can get it done.
But back to the Steelman case for freedom, right? Like we talked about it. Engineers like it. It helps them with momentum. You get to use the tool of best fit. I mean, what are the other reasons? I mean, those are the primary reasons, right? Like you're giving some autonomy to the team.
Yeah, they feel like they're contributing to the greater good of the environment because they can share their learnings. And there's a lot of developers who don't like to talk about things. They just like to do their job, put their head down, and go. But there's others that really want to share and contribute to the broader organization, and learning new tools can help with that, can help with scratching the itch of I'm making everything better, not just my one app. So for those developers who like to really dig in and learn, they can really lose their the stagnation, the mental stagnation, because they're able to share and they can improve the organization. But also you can find out who's pushing the limits and who's not. But giving that opportunity to somebody who has the desire to improve the broader organization, to learn something new and share it, you get to see who's potentially an up and coming all-star versus just somebody who can just get this get the work done.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out, I think, too, to what you're saying, right? Is this isn't just like we keep using the example of Java or JavaScript or .NET or whatever. The language wars and the religious wars that are the language wars are some of the more obvious places that these conversations take place. But to your point as well, like we talked about serverless versus Kubernetes. We've talked about, what you're talking about, like different tools, like, hey, let's use Postman or Insomnia, or here's a workflow, or here's a pipeline architecture change. I mean, a lot of these things, it's the same conversation around, do you want to centralize? Do you want to the term enterprises will use is rationalize, right? Like you don't want to duplicate efforts. You want to have a platform strategy. Like it looks, there's a lot of different terms people use for basically the same question of, do we centralize this piece of the stack or this piece of the decision making or this piece of the overall SDLC ALM process into a central point, or do we decentralize it, right? And obviously you can't decentralize everything. Like you're not going to let every single team go and have their own GitHub or, we're going to use Azure DevOps. No, we're going to use GitHub. No, we're using GitLab, and they're all over the place. Like just putting stuff on credit cards. Like if you're an enterprise, that would be absolutely insane. So like nobody's, I don't think, advocating for that level of the spectrum, but where's the line, right?
Yeah. So, for an example, right, we, past life, we had to load 10 million records into a Dynamo database, and you can build that with a standard pipeline, right? You open the file, you spin through the file, all the records of the file, and you one by one, you drop them into the database. A very clean, simple, vanilla, ETL process. It's technically possible. The team had built something out like that originally because at that time, this is what they knew. This is the standard, is to build a Lambda and spin through it. It took 10 hours, 11 hours. Not great. And so we had the freedom to try something new, to use the best tool for the job, as you say. And they piloted using AWS Glue and Python, not in their standard stack. Wasn't something that they were used to doing, but they trimmed down the ETL process from 11 hours to 30 minutes. And so, there's significant learnings that the team had made along the way. And it wasn't just as simple as, flip over from one to the other. They had to learn a little bit along the way, but now that repeatable pattern has shaved off weeks of time from having to load files. And then they shared that pattern across others and made the organization better because they had the ability to try something new, and it was the lack of standardization there. But that full freedom saved tens of thousands of dollars over time, easily.
I think we've articulated a pretty good case for, as much freedom as is reasonable. And then now, like I would say, let's shift into, what's the case for centralizing, right? And I think it comes down to one word, right? Efficiency. Right? Like it's just way, way, way more efficient to have a stack, right? Like B of A was probably a great example of this. Although this wasn't entirely true because it was funny. One of those things at B of A, like I was there, what was I don't know, 2011 to 2018, somewhere in there. I don't remember the exact dates, but somewhere in there. And, so it was 2 or 3 years after the Merrill acquisition. And you always could kind of tell if a system was legacy B of A or legacy Merrill, because Merrill was a .NET world and the B of A world was all Java. And they never really tried to reconcile those things because at the scale that they were at, it just wouldn't have made sense. But the B of A, kind of what they called consumer side was really robust. And another proof is like they had, to your point, there was a stack, there was a way you did stuff, right? And there was the B of A way, and they had a bunch of shared utilities. Right. Everybody was on the same frameworks. Everybody, I still remember to this day, probably still have it. It's probably still in production, but this thing called CUT, Common Utility Toolkit. And it was like 95% of the things that you would consider NFRs were in this jar, and you pulled that in and it solved all the things that you needed to care about had already been solved by the centralized team in the very B of A way. And so you had a very specific, very clear way in which you were meant to build stuff. Right. And so it was very efficient. And they had, a place like Bank of America, scales up and down a lot. They use a lot of, global delivery companies. So they've got these huge, they're adding hundreds of developers to a project. Those people are all trained very, very well on this J2E mindset. And this, here's what you do. Here's the tools. Here's the data layer. Like everybody does it the same way for the most part. And there's just you get an army of efficiency. It's uniformity. It's like, this is what happened like with Napoleon, right? Like Napoleon, like he was this great general, all those different things. But like from my read of history, one of the things I took away was it's actually what the genius he had was the logistics. He actually standardized his cannons. He actually standardized all these things that apparently people hadn't thought to do before. So he was able to move around and resupply a lot better. Right? It's the same kind of concept of that.
Yeah, you can you bring a developer in and they can start to be productive day one, right? Because this is the stack, this is what you use, and you're just go like HTTP client.
People are more fungible as well, right? Across
you can
the
move
organization.
between teams, no problem. It's the same stacks, same toolkit, same thing everywhere. The implementation details are a little bit different.
It's subject matter. Then it becomes about the subject matter, not the tech. The tech becomes less important because it's sort of, and B of A used to do this, right? Like we'll call it the big consulting companies, right? So people would ramp up and down, but really they would stay with B of A, right? So you'd have an engineer that would be on one part, that project would end, and they would cut most of the contractors. And then that person would go into a pool and then immediately get deployed somewhere else. And because the stacks were close enough, they were very readily useful, and there was a reliability there. Now, I mean, how useful they were is debatable and all those different things, but in the context of that environment, it was a good deal, and the ecosystems around them were able to optimize because of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, your ramp time is so low that it's actually cheaper to put somebody on the bench for a few weeks than letting them go and onboarding somewhere else, because you just keep them warm, move them to another team. Your ramp time goes so low, where it could take you 3 months. It's 2 weeks.
You get economies of scale at this level, right? Like think about, we talked about tools and things like that, right? Like people talk about multi-cloud and all these different things. And the argument, and some of our customers are going through this debate right now, right? Like they're like, well, we're multi-cloud, but we'd like to consolidate. And one of the reasons for that is you get purchasing power, right? Like if you're spreading your cloud spend across 3 different companies, maybe more, right? Like, some people I know like, oh, AWS, GCP, Azure, like that's there, but it's actually not it, right? Like if you're an Oracle shop, you're now paying for Oracle Cloud usually, even if you're, because all your licensing is through them. So you got all the legal relationship there anyways, even if you're hosting it on-prem or hosting it elsewhere. There's other players that are, popping up especially for smaller companies, more niche things, but you get more purchasing power if it's all in one place, right? And there's a lot of benefit to that. Oh yeah. The savings could be huge, right? Like these deals that the CSPs, the cloud service providers do, these multi-year purchases, like they have huge, just off the top discounts, right? Like 20, 30% potentially, depending on your spend. And when you're talking about like tens of millions of dollars, that's a lot of money, right? So if you're the CFO and you're negotiating with the CIO, you're talking to the CIO, and the CIO is like, well, we want to be able to let the developers choose. Like he's going to be like, what are you talking about? We'd save $10 million if you consolidate these things. Like, no, go away. All right. Like it's not even a conversation. Now, obviously it's never that cut and dry, but there's that is illustrative of the benefit. And there's also other benefits, right? Like we mentioned the Git tools before. And funny enough, although Git has emerged as the standard for coding repositories, still a lot of people with SVN floating around, still a lot of people with things like Perforce floating around. And even I don't know a single of the Fortune 500 companies that we're on the inside of or talk to people on the inside of. I don't know a single one that is consolidated on a single Git service provider.
There's always more than one.
They've all got multiple. They've all got multiple, which is hilarious. And so, like, if you think about you're the DevSecOps and developer experience, and you're trying to solve for all that, like, you don't have a single place where people go to Git code and
you've got to double your team size to be able to put rules and guardrails around multiple systems.
Exactly.
You've got to have, it's twice as much work because you're building cannot translate them easily from one to the other. It's just not that simple. Different APIs, different, and it's just all different.
Totally. And I mean, we integrate with them all, so we know, right? Like, it's like, oh my God. And the other thing is, like, you get into the situation where, to your point, you have all these guardrails you got to put in place for everything, right? Whether it's your development practices, your pipelines, all these different things. So if you have to, let's say it takes you, let's say you have a GitLab thing and to put all the rails in place and to put a standard pipeline and all the different runners and all the different things, like that probably costs you $2-3 million bare minimum, like out of the box, just for the team at an enterprise to do that, right? Because you got a lot of things there. Maybe it's less. But if you have second and by the way, and there's also the licensing and hosting costs of said platform, right? And it's like, okay, well, now you got to do that for a second product or a third product. Like one in my mind that I know they have Bitbucket, GitHub, and GitLab, right? And it's like, okay, cool. You've got to have all those. Now, maybe you get some efficiency because that team has just done that, and so they can reuse some of their stuff
a little bit.
But still, like, let's say it's $2 million to secure the one, and it's still it's $4 million to secure all three, maybe, right? Like, it's just super wasteful, and there's no real benefit.
There's a lot of risk there, right? Because you don't know if it's completely repeated on every single platform because they're a little bit different. So you might have a bug in one, but that blast radius becomes bigger the more you
blast radius, surface area, all those things, right? Like, it's just, you're just increasing your risk overall and operational risk by not consolidating. Consolidation. Now and we'll talk about the bear case in this kind of straw man of these things too, but like that opens up there are pros and cons. Like there are no solutions, only trade-offs, right? And so I think, but that fundamentally it comes down to efficiency. And also, I think it's also worth pointing out, right? Like if you're the centralized shop, if you're making centralized decisions, as the leadership, you can have greater confidence in the decisions, right? Because you could spend more time on the decision and you can make sure the right visibility and people, it's like if you're going to make the decision between being a Java shop and a Go shop at an enterprise level, for example, and you're going to make a full effort into moving that, or cloud versus on-prem is maybe a better distinction there, right? Like that's a CIO level decision. That the problem is if you leave that down to the individual teams, are we going to put this on the cloud or like it's too haphazard, right? Like you get so much more benefit. It's like, no, I'm setting a strategic direction. Maybe it's not perfect for 100% of cases, but the coherence of a consistent plan will cover over the suboptimal nature of 10 or 15% of the situation, right? And so
you're not repeating
so
those
there's
decisions.
that real
You're not repeating over and over again. Is this cloud? Is this on-prem? It's just, this is the decision, go. And there's a lot less just guessing or figuring out a lot
less
just
decision
go.
fatigue, right? Like you're not having to, and I mean, we've done this with some people, like at the lower level, right? Like, oh, fuck, we have to go around and around with everybody on every single thing. It's like, no. We've set this one. We've eliminated this question. This question is now rendered in state. We can move on to things that are actually important on a distinct basis. So again, efficiency is the real gain. Any other kind of pros in the centralized?
The point is you've got to make quick decisions, right? The best thing for an organization is the speed at which you make decisions. And so if you can short circuit and make sure that your time to making a decision is as low as possible, your efficiencies will just skyrocket with some of this. Now, it's not perfect. And we'll talk about that soon, but the quicker you make decisions, the quicker you can make the next one and the next one and the next one. And you don't have to burn out that way.
Yeah, that's good. All right. So let's get into, I mean, we've sort of done it as we're talking through it, but
a little bit. Just touch into it.
Let's criticize the distributed freedom model, right? Like, why would you push back on that end of the spectrum? What is the rationale for, like, what are the problems with that actually is probably a better way to say it.
It's a spectrum, right? You've got one side of the spectrum is full freedom, do whatever you want, wherever you want, anytime you want, right? That's on that side, it's just time, right? You're going to move slower because you've got somebody trying something new out every single time. And I'm a little bit guilty of that myself sometimes. And I'll put myself on that, is that you want to try something new. You try something new. Maybe it works out. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you get a win. Maybe you don't. But your time to deliver something is longer. and you're building up a new tooling set. You're building up a new, the new mental model of how this should work. You've got deployed a new service or API that like, oh, I didn't think about how to secure this part of it in this new language, new system, or a new cloud platform to the, opposite end of it. We've put into GCP. You've got to redo all the controls on that. You've got to redo all of the access requirements. The time to deliver those things just skyrockets when you try something new every single time. Again, that's the way end of the spectrum, right? You're just full bore, something new every single time. But even still, you've got to build up tooling around something. If you're trying Terraform versus CloudFormation, there's going to be some shared utilities and shared libraries that you need to have and make sure that your security posture in that cloud provider is considered and taken care of. You got to redo all that again. It's the time to handle something and also make all those edge cases for that freedom just go shoot. You will miss every single one of your timelines. No doubt about it. No question in my mind. Will you have a huge risk posture? You'll not be able to secure everything with all the cloud providers in a reasonable amount of time. Your delivery will suffer because your developers don't know what to use, so they'll just try to figure it out. So teams will move slower. Decisions will be slower. Every bit of it with unlimited freedom will move slower.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And I mean, I think it'll just be more expensive too. Like that's the other, I think that's one of the big ones
in this case.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. Like the time, but also like the actual cost of the way you do things, right? Mm-hmm. Like you don't get, even, I mean, like AWS, for example, like one of the things, like, let's say you were running a bunch of containerized stuff, right? And if you go in and you say, hey, I'm going to use this size of container for this app and this size of container for this app, and then I'm going to scale them horizontally. It's like, well, that's really dumb, right? Because if you use the same size and scale horizontally, you can now use reserved instances and save 30, 40% off of that number, right? But because you did it individually, you don't get the additional scale, and Bob's your uncle, right? So like those types of things, the FinOps of it all is a big part of it, I think. But I agree with you. I mean, I think what ultimately ends up happening, I think your security and risk postures are completely ignored if you have that kind of freedom, because
you just can't. There's no way to control it all.
The overhead just goes crazy. Like, and you hear about like, places like Meta and Google and Netflix and stuff, like teams get to start from scratch and they can do whatever they want. Like, it seems crazy to me. Like, it seems all of the benefits of the wider engineering organization and the in-jobs of it all, the engineering operations of it all, of whether they're using some sort of compliance framework or whatever. Like, if you're doing that at the individual team level effectively, and each one of those teams is either ignoring those requirements or doing it or fulfilling them themselves, it's just so wasteful. It's just so crazy wasteful.
They're just burning cash on that, but they're also making piles of cash every day.
Fair. It's like their leverage is crazy, but my guess is they actually have massive holes in what they're doing, right? Like, and they don't,
absolutely,
and no doubt about it. They're not checking it, and they don't report it because they're not financial institutions and things like. And that's the difference. A lot of places we work with are tied to the financial world, and they have really, really tight reporting requirements, or people go to jail, right? Like, and it's one of my favorite quotes from a CISO that we used to work with, and she would always say, "I don't want to be in the news, and I don't want to go to jail." Like, those are her priorities. And I was like, fair enough, right? Like, that's I actually really like that. Not to digress too much, but I actually really like that she used to say that to her, to everybody, because it was, although it was cheeky and all those things, it was also like a very clear statement of priority, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, these things are what matter. Like, these are what matter, right? Like, we need to make sure we're in compliance with the law, and we need to make sure we do something that our customers aren't going to be pissed about, which in the news, right? And it's like, and it's kind of like I said, a cheeky way to say that, but it really cuts to the bone of the matter, and I always like that. So, all right, so freedom, yeah. If you want freedom, go build your own thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of like the argument there, right? Like, if you want full freedom, obviously you can stagnate too much, right? And that, as we kind of move into the bear case for being too centralized.
Well, before we do that though, I think you can still stagnate on full freedom, right? If you full freedom everywhere, you don't have the critical mass to get to the point where you are truly innovating. The hardest part of building a new app is just the greenfield, and it's the most boring. But the real learnings comes into that extra 20% at the end. You got yourself 80% of the way there. You built a new app. Okay, that's just the simple CRUD endpoints of a system. That 80 to 100 is where the real learning comes in, where real innovation comes in. And if you have such a flat posture for taking on everything, you can almost never get to that extra 20% to truly innovate, because you're always reinventing the wheel somewhere. You're not pushing the team to get, slim down a little bit. Like we talked about the far end of the spectrum with full freedom. Maybe you scale that back a little bit and say, look, here's where we are. Here's where Node, Python, Go, right? You limit the blast radius, and then you can get to that point where that extra 20% comes in to really be innovated versus having to make sure your entire security posture is covered for all the languages. So I think there's some benefit to then slimming that down in a way.
Bear case for centralized. I mean, I think I think we've mostly hit it already, but fundamentally you get stagnant pretty easily, right? Like, and it can get frustrating for people if they have no say over the way they do things. They just feel like a cog in a machine. There's a lot of people that are standardized on Bitbucket Data Center, right? Like, or something like that. It's like, we've been using this for years. We've got all this tooling. It works great. Is it the best tool today? We've standardized, but are we standardized on the right thing or Jenkins, right? Like, a lot of people love Jenkins. We've standardized on Jenkins. It's like, yeah, that's cool, but like only if you only know Jenkins, right? Like, Jenkins was awesome when it came along, but like once you've used some of the other tools, you're like, oh wow, I can't believe you still use Jenkins. What are you doing? Right? And so, I mean, that's a personal opinion, obviously, but you do get into that there is that risk, right? It's like you have a team that owns a tool, you own a platform. They're the ones making the decision. They're going to want to keep with, they're likely going to want to keep with their thing because there's all this extra work. There's reasons the Soviet Russia collapsed, right? Like, there's bad incentives to centralized planning, right? Like, it doesn't, over time, it breaks down and things like that. You have to have a renewal of the ideas and the motivations, and that's where decentralized can be useful. And so, it's a struggle. And the one thing you mentioned something before I wanted to come back to here. You were talking about you wanted like really good speed on decision making, right? Like, and I think one of the things Bezos said that's become kind of common in the tech world. You talked about the one-way door versus two-way door, right? And the benefit of the distributed decision making is it turns almost everything into a two-way door, right? Because like, if you're doing it in just this little pocket, like, it's, if you've got 1,000 engineers working for you or 1,000 people in technology working for you, and you got this pocket of 20 people that's making a decision that it just really, their blast radius is just that team, that's a two-way door, right? Like, that's not the end of the world. If they completely fall on their face from the CIO seat, you're like, okay, I mean, we learned something. Like, we're not going to do that again, right? And like, whatever. But if you, as you centralize, you have fewer two-way doors, you have more one-way doors, right? Because as things move up the chain, and again, it depends on what it is, right? Like, are we going to use Azure or AWS? I mean, it's not a one-way door, but it's like, it is largely, right? Like, you can always change it with enough time and enough money, but it's, whatever your threshold to turn something into a one-way door is, one-way doors should sit at the top. The decision-making should always happen at the top, in my opinion, because the accountability is there. So the people that have the accountability should be making the decision, right? And so that's the piece on that, I would say. But again, it's stagnation, right? It's stagnation. And also, are you going to attract the right kind of people, right? Like, we talked about like the B of A context, they were incredibly reliant, even to the point where they had massive initiatives to try to change this on, offshore contractors or international contractors, right? And so, like, if that, and some of that's economics, they were making a calculation that says, hey, this makes this good economic sense for us. But also, some of it was like, they couldn't necessarily attract the engineers that would supplant them, because like, who wants to work and be a cog in a wheel, right? Like, if you're a really good engineer, you've got options.
When I was working at the agencies way back, the joke was, work at the agencies for a while, but then go to B of A to retire, because you just cruise at that point in time.
Yeah. No, I mean,
No, there's a lot of great people there. I'm not trying to discount. There are plenty of talented people there, but that was the joke, is that you're stagnant there. You just get through the day there, and that's it. You cash your check and you get work done. You go home, and it's
No, for sure. And so, I mean, that the point being, like, what are you attracting, and all those different things. And I think, and to kind of pull it back up a level, like, I think fundamentally, if you're a leader trying to make these decisions, and I've seen it. I've seen leaders that are very sort of top down in their approach, and I've seen leaders that really want to provide autonomy to teams. Like, I remember one guy in particular, he wanted to provide autonomy to teams, and he had a couple of teams on in his organization that were weaponizing that back at him, and they were doing things that were really unwise. But he was trying to help them get to the place where they would make the right decision and make it for themselves. And then ultimately, like, after a year or so of that, I had to say, boss, you just gotta overrule these guys. Like, they're just not going to get there. And if you, and ultimately, they're making a bad call, you have to override them. But I appreciated where his mind was at, in the sense that he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to use authority to force an engineering organization to make a change. From a technical standpoint, actually, to great risk to himself, and his credibility, allowed them the rope to sort of figure it out for themselves. Now, unfortunately, in that case, they never really did, and he had to sort of mandate it. But at that point, like, he didn't lose any, like, it cost him nothing from an engineering cultural standpoint to then overrule and say that, because he had given them every opportunity to kind of, quote unquote, come to the right decision. Your philosophy matters, and your culture matters, and the size of the organization matters. Like, those things, where you fall in the spectrum, what I would encourage you to do, or, anyone out there that's doing this, is not let it be an ego thing. Like, I'm the one that's going to make this decision. Like, we see that too, also a little bit too much. And it's like, I think we've talked about a lot of, like, the trade-offs, understand the trade-offs, and bias to, again, back to, like, my original bias toward decentralized decision making as much as it makes sense, but understand that it doesn't always make sense, right? And then help people understand it. And that, one of the main reasons we talked about, like, having this conversation was, yeah, sure, it's for leaders, but also we hope, like, individual engineers that get really ticked off by this type of decision that comes from the top. Oh yeah, the suits are making a decision, right? We want them to actually understand it's not that arbitrary. I mean, we don't know every situation, but there's a lot of things to balance that you're not really necessarily thinking about as an individual developer. And so part of our conversation was to hopefully paint that picture for them as well.
And there's tiers of decisions, right? There's freedom within certain levels. You can have freedom to pick specific programming languages, but you don't have the freedom to pick a cloud provider. You have the freedom to pick the implementation details and which parts of AWS you're using, but you've got to stick within this pattern. So there's levels, there's tiers, there's individuals at the lower level, at the individual contributor. Yeah, sure, go for it. Pick something novel or new. But as long as you stay within these boundaries, then you're good. And that's typically where I've seen the best results, because you can make sure that your security posture is there. You can make sure that you're not going multi-cloud and opening up the whole new risk profile of a second cloud, or cloud versus on-prem. Limit the decisions that can be made, but then open up freedom to some of the lower level implementation details. That's where I found the best results and the best success. You can keep the people who really want to be challenged. They can challenge themselves on things, but you're not stagnating so that you just stick with one thing forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very helpful thing to spell that out for people too, right? Like, where does the decision-making tree live, right? Like, what's set in stone? Okay, cool. We're using GitLab or GitHub or Azure DevOps or whatever we're using. Like, who gets to make that decision? Well, that's a CIO decision. Okay, cool. Because it's got a big contract associated with it, and then a lot of cost of migration and all those different things. Same thing, cloud provider, blah, 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 blah. But to your point, like, hey, on this team, you can choose your own IDE, which sounds trivial and sounds obvious, but not always.
Sometimes it's mandated.
Sometimes it's mandated because we have this special plugin you have to use or whatever, right?
Or they have a license for this one for everybody. They use JetBrains for everything, and that's what you get.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, there's things like, or I mean, this is one of those things that I philosophically think is really cool, but haven't ever actually seen done at scale in a real way is, or it's a cloud-based IDE, right? Like you have to use a VS Code-based IDE because it's built into cloud spaces or code spaces or whatever, right? So there's things like what do you have the freedom to choose, right? Like to your point, you know, can I use a different library to write this API, right? Can I use, typically the stack is Express, but can I go do something in Next, or can I go do something in Koa or whatever, right? Like, do I have that, like articulating whether or not you have the freedom to choose that can sometimes be a really useful thing for people, give them kind of an operating guidelines in the team. It's on the back end, it's not as scary to give people that freedom. On the front end, you can't really, because it gets too chaotic, because you have to share things across stuff, and has to be a little bit more, that's where context again matters, right? Like if you have a large front end space, like we work a lot with online banking spaces and things like that. Like you have to have somebody that's kind of the prison guard, tough person that's going to like keep things under control, or else your bundles get bigger and bigger and bigger and everything's chaos and it slows down the app and all those things.
Well, oftentimes if you have the right people, those standards set themselves though. I had opinions, but you can put certain guardrails in place that make developers pick the right thing according to what the standards you would pick are. But you can surprise yourself by the team setting their own standards because they can find the right answer themselves. And so you don't have to be that top-down approach. You can, it might surprise you how good decisions can be made without any input from yourself.
Yeah. No, for sure. I just meant on the front end piece, there needs to be a governance process, because you can't use React and Angular in the same app, right? Like it'll break. Right. So that's just what I meant. But I agree with what you're saying. We deal with this at our own thing. Like I come from a technology background, but like my job is not to be a technologist in this company, right? Like occasionally it is, like just because I got to ship some code. The overwhelming urge is for me to help make that decision, make technology decisions, but that's actually not my job. So I have to like try to not do that. I think one of the mechanisms that we've sort of worked out, and I tried to work out in the past, but is like, instead of me saying, I think we should do this or I think we should do that, is I think a great way to sort of delegate those decisions, or not just delegate it, but encourage and validate that it's not, you're not making the decision, that's someone else's decision to make, is to call out, okay, here's what I think matters. Call it like success criteria or, acceptance criteria or whatever, that don't dictate the implementation, that don't dictate the choice. Right. To your point, if you do a good job of that, if you do a thoughtful job of that, and you say to it, somebody's like, hey, we're using Express, but I want to use Koa, right? And you're like, cool, you should go check that out. Here's what matters, right? Mm-hmm. Like here's what I would care about. Here's how I'm going to evaluate. Here's how I think we should evaluate whether or not that's a good idea. Does it support this? Does it support that? Would we have to rewrite this? Would we have to rewrite that? Whatever the criteria are, like if you can, one of the most important things as a leader, you have context, is to teach people how to think about problems well. People can learn by osmosis by watching you make good decisions, and then they can kind of like figure it out. But it works way faster and way more effectively if you upfront tell them this is the decision-making parameters of how you need to appropriately weight these things. And I'm going to even if I might ultimately be the one that does the math and makes the decision, you can participate in that decision by using the same equation. Even if you don't see it exactly, even if you might not come to the same conclusion, you at least get a similar equation and a similar analysis. You can participate in the analysis a little bit. Like I have a former boss that I learned a lot from in that respect, because he and I would have like, why does this matter? Like he would tell me I'm wrong, or like, we're not going to do the thing you want to do. And I'd be like, well, why? Like, why does it matter to you? Like, what do you care about? Like, that's how I kind of got into the point of asking my boss, like, what matters here? Why do you care? And he would articulate it for me. And then I would help me, like the next time I would have a better argument for the thing that needed to happen. And I, started to win a lot more, which was fun. but yeah, I mean, I think that's a great call. Like from your standpoint, like give it back to the developer, but make them care about the right things.
Mm-hmm. Make them care about the same thing that you care about, because you're going to have a different perspective. You're going to see things differently. And as you should, right? More things from the broader organization than the developers will. That's your job. You need to know those things. And so making the developers care about the same thing without having to share every bit of that context, that's where the developers are then empowered to make the decisions that matter to you, so that you can still operate with the efficiency that you need to.
Cool. All right. So we've decided you should not be a Soviet. You should not be a libertarian. You should be somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle. Where that is just right. Depends.
It's up to you. And it depends on the context and all the different things. Like, are you in a turnaround? Are you in a startup? Are you like, there's all a million different things. But all right. It's cool. Well, awesome. Thanks, man. Talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody else. That's a wrap for this episode of Tech Council, brought to you by DevGrid. Thanks for joining us as we dive into building smarter solutions for the enterprise. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, leave us a rating, and share your thoughts on X, at DevGrid Inc., or at devgrid.io. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll explore more ways to thrive in the enterprise. Until then, keep building.